Okay, so we're going to start answering these questions on indices, which are our Champions Challenge. Now, these questions are probably one of the toughest questions when it comes to this topic, and would be the grade 8 of the new spec in the new GCSE. But before we actually go through and have a look how to answer these questions, we're going to work through the skills you are required in order to answer the questions. Okay, skills needed is listed as below. You need a good understanding of fractional powers. You'd also need a good understanding of negative powers, the applications of rules of indices, and also an extra skill in converting mixed numbers into top-heavy fractions. So you can pause the video at any time and work through the questions independently, then play to see a work solution. Okay, so we start off with just understanding what are fractional and negative powers. So if I have 100 to the power of a half, what that actually means is I've got a number, I multiply it by itself, and I get 100. So I've got a number, I times it by itself, and I get 100. Well, what could that number be? So I'm not looking for 50 times by 2. Both numbers have to be identical. So the only number that can multiply by itself that's identical, and that would give me 100, is 10 times by 10. So 100 to the power of a half is 10. Well, this is the same as saying square root 100. And so therefore 100 to the power of a half is equal to 10. So 25 to the power of a half is the square root of 25. So what that means is, what number multiplies by itself to give me 25? And so that answer is 5. So that's just understanding what to the power of a half means. Okay, in our next slide, you can try this one on your own, but now we need to consider what happens when we change the denominator. So now the denominator in the second question is 3. Okay, so let's have a look what it actually means. Okay, so this means, as we've already stated, a number multiplied by itself gives me 64. That number can only be 8. So 64 to the power of a half is the same as saying square root 64, which is 8. Now, if I have 125 to the power third, the denominator indicates how many times the number is multiplying by itself. So what times by what times by what gives me 125? Well, this must be 5. So 5 times by 5 is 25. 25 times by 5 is 125. Now looking back, so 125 to the power third is the same as saying cube root 125, which equals to 5. We've got that answer from one of the boxes. Now you should have a go. You can pause the video or just continue to watch it. So how many boxes are going to multiply to give me 64? That's 3. So a number multiplied by another number multiplied by another number gives me 64. Okay, so have you thought of it yet? 4 times by 4 is 16, times by 4 is 64. So the answer to this is 4. So 181 to the power of 1 over 4, how many boxes would I need? I would need 4. So you now got to think of a number that multiplies by itself 4 times to give me 81. Well, I know 9 times by 9 gives me 81, but to get the 9 in the first place, I can say 3 times by 3. Well, 3 times by 3 gets me this 9. 3 times by 3 gets me to this 9. So 81 to the power of a quarter is 3. Okay, so now we've understood what to the power of a half, a third, and a quarter is. So you probably already know how many boxes you would need in case we were powering it by 1/5. And that would be 5. Now let's look at questions where the fractional power is greater than 1, or the numerator is greater than 1. So previously we saw what happened when the numerator was 1. Now we're going to look at what happens if it's bigger than 1, what happens if it's 2. So you need to apply the rule of indice over a bracket. So what it means is, if I take 27, I can split 2/3 into 2 lots of 1/3. So 2 times by 1/3 is 2/3. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this, the fraction, inside a bracket. So I'll surround the whole number with a bracket. And then I'll drop the 2 outside. Now I've already worked out that 27 to the power of a third means 3 numbers that multiplied by itself to get me 27. That answer is 3. I'm not going to need the brackets anymore. All I'm going to do is pull down this 2 over on this side. So 3 squared is actually 9. So the answer to this question, 27 to the power of 2/3, is 9. Now you may want to just pause the video and just make a note of this. Then continue to watch if you still need some extra help. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So I've got 3/4. Well, 3/4 means 1/4 times by 3. So I've got 3 lots of 1/4. So you can also write it the other way around like I've done there. So what you must always remember, bring your fraction inside. You will notice that the fraction that you bring inside will always have a numerator of 1. So we can use the skills that we've learned on the previous slide. Now I'm going to leave that 3 on the outside. 16 to the power of a quarter means 4 numbers multiplied by itself gives me 16. Well, that answer is 2. Now I can bring down the 3. So 2 to the power of 3 is actually 8. And that's my final answer. Okay, so from this slide, we would now have a better understanding what it means by a fractional power. Okay, so now we're going to try and answer these questions on this slide. Now, as you notice, there are some negatives there, so the other skill that we need to understand is how to power numbers by negatives. Okay, well, 8 to the power of 5/3, if you can remember what we did previously, I'm going to separate these fractions, this fraction into 5 times by 1/3, or in other words, 5 lots of 1/3. So I need to keep the 1/3 inside the bracket and leave the 5 on the outside. 8 to the power of 1/3 is 2. 2 to the power of 5 is 32. Okay, just make sure you do 2 times by 2, which is 4, times by another 2, which is 8, times by another 2, which is 16, times by another 2 is 32. Okay, now you know that. What does it mean when we have this negative here? Well, that's actually quite simple, because all the negative means is that it's this number just under 1. So a negative means 1 over 8 to the power of 5/3. So that's what you've just got to remember. Now, as you see, we've already worked this out in the previous question. That is 1 over 32. So now I would pause the video and see if you can work these out. Okay, now, just before I start to work with the negative, what I've got to remember is the negative means 1 over 27 to the power of 4/3. so I can remove the negative at this point. Now, just using a different color pen, I'm going to concentrate in working what is 27 to the power of 4/3. Okay, so 27 to the power of 4/3, what I'm going to need to do is bring my third inside the bracket and then power it by 4. So 27 to the power of 1/3 is 3, and 3 to the power of 4 is 81. Now I've worked out the denominator here, which I found out was 81. I can now bring this back into the equation by doing 1 over 81. And that would be my final answer. And this is the side calculation to get there. Okay, so now you should try this one on your own. Pause the video or continue to watch if you need to reinforce the skills again. Okay, so I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to keep this whole thing under 1 so I can lose that negative sign. So it's 125 to the power of 5 over 3. Okay, so let's just look at this bit on its own, just the denominator. So if I take 125, okay, and I power it by 5 over 3, I'm going to bring that 1/3 in. I'm going to leave that 5 on the outside. Okay, so that is 125 to the power of 1 over 3. That 3 doesn't look very clear there. Okay, so that is the answer to that is 5, and then I have 5 to the power of 5, which is the denominator. So I have 1 over, 5 to the power of 5 is 3,125. And that is my final answer. So just remember, if you have negative, it's under 1. Okay, so the next two questions are now looking at what happens if we have fractions here. So this entire fraction has been powered by -2 over 3. So just to be clear that the whole fraction is being powered by -2 over 3. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to get rid of this negative. Now if you have a fraction and you want to get rid of the negative, what happens is that the fractions actually swap around. So you get 27 over 125. Okay, so this swaps around. So now it's become positive, so you can lose this negative. So just by swapping around, you've turned this into a positive. So now what we're going to do is find a third of 27. We're going to power 27 by a third, and we're going to power 125 by a third as well. Okay, so if we power the top and the bottom by a third, not very clear writing because I'm losing connectivity. So we've got 27 to the power of a third, which is 3. I've got 125 to the power of a third,